The eviction notice felt heavy in Jack Reynolds' back pocket, a folded square of paper that seemed to weigh more than the 14-inch pipe wrench currently gripped in his grease-stained hand. It was a Tuesday, but the heat shimmering off the darker planks of the Santa Monica Marina made it feel like the depths of August. Jack wiped a forearm across his forehead, smearing a mixture of sweat and 10W4O oil into his hairline. Beneath him, the twin inboard engines of the Gilded Lady, a 60-foot Sunseeker yacht, hummed with a throaty, rhythmic purr. "Is it fixed yet, Reynolds?" Jack didn't look up immediately. He gave the fuel injector one last, precise quarter turn, feeling the thread bite and hold. He took a breath, centered himself, and climbed out of the engine hatch. Wiping his hands on a rag that had been white 3 days ago, Mr. Sterling stood on the pristine teak deck, dressed in linen pants that cost more than Jack's truck. He was holding a crystal tumbler of something amber and expensive, looking at his watch with exaggerated impatience. "She's purring, Mr. Sterling," Jack said, his voice raspy from inhaling diesel fumes for 6 hours. "It was a clogged intake valve. You're good to take her out." Sterling didn't say thank you. He just nodded, already turning his back to shout at his wife about the catering. Jack stood there for a moment, the invisible servant in their kingdom of leisure, before silently gathering his tools. He climbed off the boat, his heavy work boots thudding dully against the dock. As he walked away, he reached back and touched his pocket. The paper crinkled. Final notice. Vacate by the 25th. Today was the 24th. He walked past rows of gleaming white fiberglass, past laughter and the pop of champagne corks, to the far end of the marina where the real world bled into the luxury. Here, the wood was splintered. The smell was of dead fish rather than sunscreen, and a rusted shipping container served as the mechanic's office. Sitting on a crate of tangled fishing nets in the shade of the container was Lily. She was 7, but she had the eyes of an old soul, a byproduct of losing her mother 3 years ago. She was wearing a faded pink t-shirt and swinging her legs, staring intently at a bucket of seawater she'd collected. "Hey, Bug," Jack said, forcing the tension out of his shoulders. He dropped his heavy toolbox with a clang. Lily looked up, her face lighting up in a way that broke Jack's heart a little more every day. "Did you fix the big boat, Daddy?" "Yeah, I fixed it." Jack sat down next to her, the wood groaning under his weight. He was a big man, broad-shouldered from years in the Navy and years of hauling engines, but lately he felt small. "What have you got there?" "Crabs," she whispered conspiringly. "I caught 2. "They're fighting." Jack peered into the bucket. 2 small shore crabs were circling each other in the murky water. "Looks like a heated negotiation." "Dad?" Lily's voice changed tone. The playfulness vanished, replaced by a quiet anxiety that no 7-year-old should possess. "Are we going to have to sleep in the truck again?" Jack froze. He looked at her, seeing the fear she was trying to hide. She had seen the envelope on the kitchen counter before he snatched it away. She had seen him counting coins for gas. "No, Lil," Jack lied. The lie tasted like battery acid. "I'm working on a plan. We're gonna be fine. The truck is just for adventures. Not for sleeping." "Okay," she said, though her eyes lingered on his face, searching for the truth. "Tell you what," Jack said, standing up and dusting off his jeans. "Go wait in the office. The AC is on. I've got one more check to do on the moorings, and then we'll go get a slushie." He couldn't afford a slushie. He had $74 in the bank, and his paycheck was still 3 days away, but he'd find the change in the truck seats. He had to. As Lily skipped off toward the shipping container, looking back once to wave, Jack walked to the edge of the pier. He let the mask drop, his face crumpled into a mask of exhaustion. He leaned against a piling, staring out at the Pacific Ocean. It was a vast, indifferent blue. He was 32 years old. He was a decorated veteran. He was a master mechanic, and he was a failure. The medical bills from Sarah's cancer had been a tsunami that wiped out their savings, their equity, and eventually his hope. Now, the house, the place where Sarah had painted the nursery, the place that smelled like her perfume in the closets, was gone. Tomorrow, the sheriff would come. Jack closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the marina. The distant laughter of the wealthy, the cry of gulls, the slap of water against the pilings. It was a perfect Southern California day. The sky was an insulting, cloudless azure. Just one break, he prayed to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. I just need one break. Then the hum began. It started as a low vibration in the solace of his boots, subtle at first, easily mistaken for the idle of a large yacht. But it grew. It shifted pitch, climbing from a rumble to a whine, and then to a high-pitched, tearing scream. Jack's eyes snapped open. That wasn't a boat. He knew engines. He spoke their language. That was a turbofan engine crying out in death. He looked up, shading his eyes against the harsh sun. He saw it. High above the coastline, a silver shape was violating the perfect sky. It was a mid-sized private jet, sleek and arrow-like, but it was moving all wrong. It wasn't gliding. It was banking violently to the left, caught in a flat spin. A thick ribbon of black smoke trailed from the port engine, drawing a jagged scar across the heavens. "Oh, Jesus," Jack whispered. Around the marina, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter on the Gilded Lady died. People on the pier stopped walking. Heads tilted back, fingers pointed. "Is that a drone?" someone asked nearby. "No," Jack muttered, his body tensing, the lethargy of the last hour evaporating instantly. "That's a Citation X and it's stalling." The scream of the engines grew deafening, a physical pressure against the eardrums. The plane was dropping fast, losing altitude in sickening, lurching drops. It was coming down right off the coast, just beyond the breakwater. Jack watched, horrified, as the pilot seemed to wrestle the nose up for a split second, trying to flare, trying to turn the fatal dive into a survivable ditch. It was a valiant effort, but they were too low, and the angle was too steep. Impact in 3, 2. The jet hit the water about 300 yards out. It didn't splash, it exploded into the ocean. The belly of the fuselage slammed into the surface with a sound like a cannon shot, a concussive crack that echoed off the marina buildings. Water sprayed 2 stories high, a wall of white foam that obscured the wreckage for a heartbeat. The plane skipped once, shedding parts of its wing before the nose dug into the swells. The tail whipped up, vertical, like a tombstone marking the spot, before the entire vessel began to settle heavily into the water. Silence followed. A stunning, heavy silence. On the pier, 50 people stood frozen. A woman screamed, short and sharp. Then the collective paralysis of the modern age set in. People fumbled for their pockets. They weren't reaching for radios or life preservers. They were reaching for phones. They were filming. "Did you see that? Oh my God, call 911. Is anyone getting this?" Jack looked at the wreckage. The fuselage was intact but broken. It was bobbing, heavy and sluggish. It was filling up. He looked at the Coast Guard station across the bay. The alarm klaxon began to wail, a mournful, sliding tone. But he knew the logistics. By the time they scrambled the crew, cast off, and navigated the no-wake zone of the harbor mouth, 10 minutes would pass. A plane that heavy, compromised structurally, would be on the bottom in 4. Jack looked at the people around him, the frozen faces. The recording phones. Mr. Sterling was standing on his yacht, mouth open, holding his drink. Nobody was moving. Jack looked back toward the shipping container. He could see Lily's face pressed against the dusty window, eyes wide. "Don't do it," a voice in his head whispered. "You have a daughter. You are all she has. If you die, she goes to the state." He looked at the water. The jet was sinking. He saw a flash of movement in one of the portholes. Someone was alive inside that steel coffin. The conflict in his mind lasted exactly half a second. The mechanic vanished. The worried father was shoved into a locked box in the back of his mind. The chief petty officer, the man trained in underwater demolition and rescue swimming, stepped forward. Jack didn't shout. He didn't make a speech. He simply turned and sprinted. His heavy boots hammered against the wooden planks, gaining speed. He wove through the crowd of bystanders, knocking a man in a polo shirt aside without breaking stride. "Hey, watch it!" the man yelled, phone still raised. Jack didn't hear him. His world had narrowed to a single point, the sinking tail fin. He reached the end of the pier, where the railing ended and the open ocean began. He didn't slow down. He planted his right boot on the edge of the timber, launching himself outward. For a moment, he was suspended in the air, arms outspread, the eviction notice in his pocket, the poverty, the fear, the failure, all of it left behind on the dry land. Jack Reynolds hit the water, cutting through the surface, and descended into the cold, silent blue. The water was not a welcoming embrace. It was a sledgehammer of ice. Jack Reynolds had spent years in the Navy, training in the frigid waters off Coronado, but the shock of the Pacific in late autumn still knocked the breath from his lungs. The transition from the sweltering heat of the pier to the 58-degree water was violent and absolute. His body seized, every muscle contracting in an involuntary gasp that he barely managed to suppress before he went under. He plummeted into a world of muted green and churning bubbles. The roar of the crashing jet and the screaming crowd was instantly replaced by a dull, hydraulic roar, the sound of tons of metal displacing the ocean. Jack kicked hard, driving himself down to escape the surface turbulence, but his movements were sluggish. He wasn't wearing fins or a wetsuit. He was wearing heavy denim jeans, a flannel shirt that absorbed water like a sponge, and steel-toed work boots that felt like concrete blocks strapped to his feet. Kick, glide, orient. He forced his eyes open against the stinging salt. The visibility was poor, a murky soup of disturbed sand and silt churned up by the crash. But he didn't need perfect vision to find the target. Ahead of him, looming out of the gloom like a dying whale, was the Citation X. The plane was already half submerged, the nose buried deep in the sandy bottom, the tail fin pointing toward the surface at a 45-degree angle. It was a scene of catastrophic violence. Debris was suspended in the water column seat cushions, papers, jagged pieces of aluminum skin drifting slowly, eerily in the current. Jack surfaced for one breath, breaking into the air amidst a slick of something iridescent and pungent. Jet fuel. The smell was overpowering, a chemical stench that burned his nostrils. The slick was spreading rapidly, a shimmering, deadly oil painting on the swells. Jack knew the danger instantly. One spark from a shorting wire on the plane, a boat engine, anything, and the surface of the ocean would turn into a blast furnace. He would be boiled alive. He had to move. Now, he took a massive, diaphragm-expanding breath, filling his lungs until they hurt, and surface dived. He kicked his heavy boots toward the sky, using the weight to drive him down toward the fuselage. Under the surface, the silence was heavy. Jack pulled himself through the water with broad, powerful strokes. His arms, scarred from years of turning wrenches, burned with the effort. He approached the fuselage from the rear, wary of the jagged metal that could slice him open. The plane was settling. He could hear it, a deep, metallic groan that vibrated through the water and into his bones. The pressure hull was compromising. The air pockets inside were collapsing. Jack reached the side of the jet. The metal was cold and slick. He pulled himself along the row of windows, hand over hand, fighting the buoyancy of the air trapped in his clothes. He reached the overwing emergency exit. This was the entry point. He braced his feet against the wing root and grabbed the release handle. It was designed to open easily, but the impact had twisted the airframe. The door was torqued into the frame, jammed tight. Jack pulled. He put his back into it, his biceps bulging, veins standing out like cords on his neck. Open, damn you, open. It didn't budge. The metal groaned again, a mocking screech. The plane slipped another 3 feet deeper. The light from the surface was getting dimmer, turning from a bright turquoise to a menacing deep blue. Jack let go, frustration surging through him. He was burning oxygen fast. His chest was starting to tighten, the first warning sign of CO2 buildup. He moved to the passenger windows. He peered through the thick, reinforced polycarbonate. Inside, the cabin was a chaotic aquarium. Carry-on bags floated aimlessly. An oxygen mask drifted like a jellyfish. The water level inside was halfway up the cabin and rising fast. And then he saw her. She was in the third row, unbuckled, floating freely in the semi-submerged space. The water inside was churning, tossing her gently against the ceiling. She was striking, even in this nightmare. She wore a bright red dress that billowed around her like a cloud of blood, and a sharp white blazer that was now soaked and translucent. Her hair, a golden blonde, fanned out around her head like a halo. She wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and serene. She looked like she was sleeping, suspended in zero gravity. Jack tapped on the glass. Thump, thump, no response. He looked at the water rising inside. It was inches from the ceiling now. Once the cabin was full, the plane would lose its remaining buoyancy and drop like a stone to the bottom of the shelf. If she wasn't drowned yet, she would be in seconds. He had to get inside. Jack looked at the window. It was designed to withstand the pressure differential at 40,000 feet. It was incredibly strong. But he saw something, a spiderweb fracture radiating from the center of the pane, likely caused by debris impact during the crash. It was a weak point. Jack looked at his boots, steel-toed, safety-rated. For the first time that day, he was grateful for the heavy, cumbersome footwear. He needed leverage. He grabbed the top of the window frame with both hands, curling his fingers into the slight recess. He pulled his knees up to his chest, coiling his body like a spring. He needed to strike with everything he had. He thought of the eviction notice. He thought of the look on Lily's face when she asked about sleeping in the truck. He thought of the years of bad luck, the crushing weight of the world. He channeled all that rage into his legs. He lashed out, driving both heels simultaneously into the center of the fractured glass. Thud. The sound was dull underwater, a heavy impact that jarred his spine. The crack widened. His lungs were screaming now. The urge to breathe was becoming a rhythmic spasm in his diaphragm. His vision was spotting at the edges. One more, make it count. He coiled again. He roared a silent scream of effort, bubbles escaping his lips, and drove his boots forward. Crack whoosh, the window shattered. Shards of polycarbonate exploded inward, carried by the rush of ocean water equalizing the pressure. The force of the suction jerked Jack forward, dragging his upper body through the jagged frame. He felt the sharp bite of glass slicing into his forearms and shoulders, but the adrenaline numbed the pain. He was inside. The cabin was dark and disorienting. He kicked free of the frame and swam toward the woman. She was drifting near the ceiling. Jack grabbed the lapel of her white blazer. She was heavy, dead weight. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close to his chest. Her head lolled back, her neck limp. Don't be dead, he thought furiously. Don't you dare be dead. He turned back toward the broken window. The plane shifted again, tilting steeply. The exit was now angled downward. Jack kicked off the leather seats, propelling himself toward the hole. His lungs were on fire. The air hunger was no longer a warning. It was a panic alarm ringing in his brain, demanding he open his mouth and inhale. No, not yet. He pushed the woman through the window first, guiding her head to avoid the jagged edges. He shoved her clear, then grabbed the frame and hauled himself out. The ocean felt vast and impossibly heavy. They were deeper now, maybe 25 feet down. The surface looked miles away, a shimmering mirror of unreachable light. Jack grabbed the back of the woman's blazer with one hand and kicked for the sky. It was the hardest physical thing he had ever done. His boots were dragging him down. The wet clothes were heavy. The woman was dead weight, and his body was screaming for oxygen. He kicked, left, right. Dark spots danced in his vision. His chest convulsed. Just a little further. He looked up at the light. It was getting brighter. He could see the bubbles rising from his own clothes, racing him to the top. Don't quit. Lily needs you. Don't quit. He gave one final, desperate thrust with his legs, his hand reaching up, grasping at the light. Whoosh, they broke the surface. The air tasted sweet and sharp. Jack gasped a ragged, desperate inhalation that sounded like a sob. He sucked in oxygen, coughing as seawater mixed with the air, but he didn't stop. He flipped onto his back, kicking furiously to keep his head and the woman's face above the swells. Hey, he choked out, slapping her cheek lightly with his wet hand. Hey, breathe! She didn't breathe. Her face was gray-blue, her lips pale. The world above the water was chaos. The silence of the deep was gone, replaced by the wail of sirens from the shore and the shouting of people on the pier. A Coast Guard boat was tearing toward them from the harbor mouth, orange lights flashing, throwing up a massive wake. Man in the water! Someone screamed from a nearby sailboat. Jack didn't wait for the boat. He didn't wait for permission. The instinct to complete the mission drove him. He hooked his arm under the woman's shoulders, keeping her airway clear of the slap of the waves, and began the swim back to the pier. It was only 50 yards, but it felt like 50 miles. Every stroke was a battle against exhaustion. His limbs felt made of lead. The cut on his shoulder was stinging from the salt. But he locked his gaze on the ladder at the end of the dock and didn't blink. He reached the pilings. 2 dockhands were there, reaching down. "Grab her!" Jack yelled, his voice raw. They grabbed the woman's arms and hauled her up. Jack hung on the ladder for a moment, his head bowing, water dripping from his nose, his chest heaving like a bellows. He considered just letting go, just floating there for a minute, but the job wasn't done. He groaned and hauled himself up the ladder, collapsing onto the wet wood of the pier. He was shivering violently now, the adrenaline crash beginning to set in. He crawled over to where they had laid the woman. A crowd was forming, a ring of shocked faces staring down. "Give her space," Jack snarled, pushing a man's legs aside. He knelt beside her. She was motionless. No rise and fall of the chest. Jack placed his ear to her mouth. Silence. He felt for a pulse at her carotid artery. Nothing. "Come on," Jack growled. He interlocked his fingers, placed the heel of his hand on the center of her sternum, and leaned over her. "You don't get to die today." "Not on my watch." He began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He pushed hard and fast, deep compressions that cracked cartilage. It wasn't the gentle CPR scene in movies. It was violent, mechanical, and exhausting. 28, 29, 30. He pinched her nose, tilted her head back, and sealed his mouth over hers. He breathed 2 sharp, quick breaths into her lungs. He watched for the chest to rise. It did. He went back to compressions. "Wake up," he gritted out between shoves. "Wake up." The crowd was silent now. The only sound was Jack's ragged breathing and the wet slap of his hands against her chest. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Jack's arms were trembling. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto her white blazer. "Don't you quit on me," he whispered. Suddenly, beneath his hands, her body spasmed. It was a violent convulsion, her back arching off the wood. Jack pulled back just as she turned her head and retched. A torrent of seawater expelled from her lungs, soaking the wood. She coughed, a terrible, ragged, hacking sound that tore at her throat, and then sucked in a breath that sounded like a scream of pure desperation. Her eyes flew open. They were a startling, piercing green. They were wide with terror, scanning the sky, the wood, the faces. She scrambled backward, her heels scraping on the dock, panic seizing her. "Easy," Jack said, raising his hands. "Easy," her eyes locked onto him. She saw the man dripping wet, shirtless now, his flannel shirt lost in the struggle or ripped open, he didn't remember, bleeding from cuts on his arms, his chest heaving. She stared at him, the panic slowly receding, replaced by a dawning realization. She looked at the water. She looked at him. "You're okay," Jack panted, brushing wet hair out of his eyes. "You're safe. You're on the dock." She reached out, her hand trembling uncontrollably. She gripped his wrist. Her fingers were ice cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She tried to speak, her lips moving, but only a raspy croak came out. "It's okay," he said again, covering her hand with his own. "I've got you." The wail of the sirens grew louder. The paramedics swarmed onto the pier, pushing through the crowd with their bags and stretchers. "Sir, step back. We've got it from here." Jack was jostled aside. The connection was broken. He fell back onto his haunches, watching as they put an oxygen mask on her, checked her vitals, and wrapped her in a foil blanket. The woman, the survivor, struggled to sit up as they loaded her onto the gurney. She turned her head, ignoring the EMTs, her green eyes searching the crowd. She found Jack. He was sitting on a crate now, head down, holding his own bleeding arm. He looked up and met her gaze. There was no wave, no thumbs up, just a long, intense look of recognition. She looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face. Then the ambulance doors slammed shut, cutting off the connection. Jack sat there for a long time. The crowd began to disperse, the show over. The adrenaline was leaving his system, leaving behind a cold, aching hollow. His hands were shaking so hard he couldn't have held a wrench if he tried. "Dad!" The voice cut through the fog. Lily came running down the pier, her face streaked with tears. She had been held back by the marina manager, but she had broken free. She slammed into him, burying her face in his wet jeans, sobbing uncontrollably. I saw you jump. I thought you weren't coming back." Jack winced as her hug pressed against his bruised ribs, but he didn't pull away. He wrapped his cut arms around her small frame, burying his nose in her hair. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and sunshine, the opposite of the death and fuel he had just tasted. "I'm okay, Lil," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm okay, I promised, didn't I?" "I've got a plan." He looked out at the water. The jet was gone. The ocean had swallowed it whole. The surface was calm again, save for the iridescent shimmer of the oil slick being broken up by the Coast Guard boats. He was alive. The woman was alive. But as he tried to stand, his knees buckled. He reached into his back pocket out of habit. He pulled out the wet clump of paper, the eviction notice. It was a soggy pulp now, the ink running, the words illegible. But the reality of it hadn't changed. He was still broke. He was still a mechanic with a blown radiator and no home. He had saved a life, but he hadn't saved himself. "Come on, Bug," he whispered, standing up painfully, his boots squelching with every step. "Let's go home." He took her hand and walked away from the sea, leaving a trail of water and blood on the wooden planks, heading back toward the truck that was their only certainty in the world. The next morning, the sun rose with an insulting, blinding cheerfulness. It streamed through the gaps in the curtains of the small, peeling bungalow, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air dust kicked up from packing boxes. Jack Reynolds sat at his small, wobbly kitchen table, staring at a bowl of oatmeal that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He tried to lift the spoon, but his arm protested with a sharp, searing pain. He looked down at his forearm. The bandages he had applied last night were spotted with red. His body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. Every muscle, from his trapezoids to his calves, was locked in a spasm of overuse. The dive, the cold, the kick through the glass, the swim it had taken a toll that adrenaline had masked yesterday, but reality was collecting on today. "Dad?" Jack flinched, pulling his sleeve down to hide the blood. He turned to see Lily standing in the hallway. She was wearing her favorite mismatched socks and clutching a stuffed bear that had seen better days. "Hey, Bug," Jack rasped. He cleared his throat. "Ample sleep?" "I had a bad dream," she said, climbing onto the chair opposite him. "I dreamt the ocean came into the house." Jack's heart clenched. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "The ocean stays where it is, Lil, I promise." A heavy thud on the front door made them both jump. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the hammer fist of authority. Jack stood up, ignoring the protest of his bruised ribs. He walked to the door and opened it a crack. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, stood on the porch. He was a sweating, impatient man who held a clipboard like a weapon. Behind him, leaning against a cruiser parked on the street, was a deputy sheriff, arms crossed, sunglasses on. "It's the 25th, Reynolds," Henderson said, not bothering with a greeting. "You got the notice. Noon, that's the deadline." "I know what day it is, Henderson," Jack said, his voice low. "I'm packing." "We'll be out. You better be," Henderson sneered, trying to peer past Jack into the house. "I've got a cleaning crew coming at 1. "If there's trash left behind, I'm billing you." "There won't be trash," Jack said, his jaw tightening. "Just memories. Save the poetry." Noon. Henderson turned and waddled back toward the deputy. Jack closed the door and leaned his forehead against the wood. He closed his eyes. He had 3 hours. He had $74. He had a truck with a blown radiator that might make it 10 miles before overheating. He walked back to the kitchen. Lily was staring at him. She had heard everything. "Are we going now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah, honey," Jack said, grabbing a roll of packing tape. "Finish your oatmeal. We're going on that adventure I told you about." "Dad," Lily said, looking past him out the front window. "Who are they? Who are who?" "Henderson is gone." "No," Lily whispered. "The black cars, the secret agent cars." Jack frowned. He dropped the tape and walked to the window, peeling back the sheer curtain. He froze, rolling slowly down his cracked asphalt street. Moving in a tight, predatory formation were 3 black Cadillac Escalades. They were pristine, their paint gleaming like obsidian in the morning sun, chrome rims flashing. They looked utterly alien in this neighborhood of rusted chain-link fences and overgrown lawns. They didn't pass the house. They slowed. The lead vehicle turned into his gravel driveway, crunching the stones. The second followed. The third blocked the driveway entrance, sealing the perimeter. "Get back from the window," Jack ordered, the old instincts flaring. He moved Lily behind the refrigerator. Stay there. Jack grabbed the wrench he had left on the counter. It was a pathetic weapon against whatever this was, but it was all he had. Had the landlord called in a SWAT team? Was this about the plane? The doors of the lead and rear vehicles opened in unison. 4 men stepped out. They were big, wearing dark suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of ballistic vests underneath. They wore earpieces. They didn't look at the house. They scanned the street, the neighbors' yards, the rooftops, professional, high-end. Then the driver of the middle car got out. He walked around to the rear passenger door and opened it. A woman stepped out. Jack lowered the wrench. She wasn't wearing the ruined red dress or the soaked white blazer. She was wearing a tailored navy business suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her left arm was in a sleek black sling held close to her body. She wore oversized dark sunglasses that hid her eyes, but Jack knew exactly what color they were. She walked with a slight limp, but her posture was rigid, commanding. She looked at the peeling paint of his bungalow, the weeds in the yard, the rusted truck. She didn't look disgusted. She looked focused. "It's her," Jack whispered. "The lady from the water?" Lily peeked out. "Yeah, stay here." Jack opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. He felt acutely underdressed in his stained jeans and gray t-shirt, barefoot. The 4 bodyguards tensed as he appeared, their hands twitching toward their jackets. "Stand down," the woman said. Her voice was raspy, the salt water still taking its toll, but it carried authority that cracked like a whip. The men relaxed instantly. She walked to the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him. She took off her sunglasses. The bruising around her eyes was dark and angry, purple and yellow blooming against her pale skin. One eye was bloodshot. She looked like she had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight, but she was standing. "Mr. Reynolds?" she said. "Ma'am," Jack nodded. You're walking." "I'm stubborn," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "And I have excellent doctors. Though they advised me to stay in bed for a week, I told them I had an appointment." "Appointment?" Jack asked. "With the man who decided I shouldn't die yesterday." Jack shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "I just did what anyone would do." "We both know that's a lie, Jack," she said softly. "I saw the videos. People stood on that pier and filmed me drowning for 3 minutes. You jumped." She gestured to the door. "May I come in?" Jack hesitated. He looked at the boxes stacked in the hallway. The half-eaten oatmeal, the poverty he had tried so hard to keep dignified. "It's not a good time," Jack said, glancing at the street where Henderson and the deputy were watching, mouths open from 50 yards away. "We're in the middle of a move." "I know," she said. "The eviction, noon today." Jack stiffened. "How do you know that?" "My name is Elena Vance," she said. "I'm the CEO of Vance Global. My security team is very thorough. They briefed me on everything about you this morning at 6 a.m. Your service record, your discharge, your wife, the medical bills, and the eviction." She climbed the steps, wincing slightly as she put weight on her bad leg. "Please, I have a proposition." Jack stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." Elena entered the small house. The bodyguards stayed outside, turning their backs to the house to form a protective wall. Inside, Elena took in the room. She saw the mismatched furniture, the photos of Lily on the mantel, the frantic packing. She saw the eviction notice sitting on the counter, a dried, crinkled ball of paper that Jack had tried to salvage. She walked over to the kitchen table. Lily was still standing behind the refrigerator, peeking out. "Hello," Elena said, her voice softening instantly. "You must be Lily." Lily nodded, eyes wide. "Are you a spy?" Elena smiled, and for a moment the corporate mask dropped completely. "No, I'm just someone your daddy helped." She looked at Jack. "Can we sit?" Jack pulled out a chair for her. She sat carefully, adjusting her sling. Jack sat opposite her, pushing the oatmeal bowl aside. "Jack, I'm going to be direct," Elena said, her business tone returning. "I value my life very highly. My board of directors values it even more. Yesterday, the systems I pay millions of dollars for failed me. My pilots panicked, my plane failed. My security detail was 10 minutes behind." She leaned forward, her green eyes locking onto his. "When I was trapped in that cabin, watching the water rise, I made peace with the fact that I was dead. Then I saw a boot come through the window. She reached into her leather bag, which had been carried in by one of her men and placed by the door. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the cheap laminate table. "This is a retainer," she said. Jack looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. "I didn't do it for money." "I know," Elena said. "That's why I'm here." "If you were the kind of man who did it for money, you would have sold your interview to the news this morning. You didn't. You came home to pack. Open it." Jack picked up the envelope. His hands, usually steady with a wrench, shook slightly. He opened the flap and pulled out a check. He stared at the number. He blinked, thinking his vision was blurry from the concussion. $100,000. It wasn't just money, it was the house. It was the debt. It was Lily's college. It was air in his lungs. "I can't," Jack choked out, pushing it back. This is too much. It's a rounding error for me, Jack," Elena said, her voice hard. "Don't let your pride rob your daughter of a roof. Take the check. Cash it, buy this house, or burn it down and buy another one." "I don't care," she tapped the table. "But that's just the thank you." "That's for yesterday. I'm here to talk about tomorrow." Jack looked up. "Tomorrow?" "My head of personal security is being fired as we speak," Elena said. "He's a good administrator, but he's reactive. He waits for the threat to happen. You?" She shook her head. "You saw a plane go down and you calculated the drop rate, the fuel risk, and the window of opportunity before the rest of the world even realized it wasn't a movie." She pointed out the window at the Cadillacs. "I need a shadow, Jack. I need someone who stays calm when the world is ending. I want to hire you as my chief of personal security. You'll answer only to me." Jack sat back, stunned. "I'm a mechanic. I haven't done security work since Kandahar," Elena finished. "I read the file. You haven't lost the skills. You just stopped using them. The job pays $300,000 a year," she continued, dropping the number like it was the weather report. "Full benefits, health, dental, vision, the best plan in the country. And a relocation package." Jack looked at Lily. 300,000. He could give her the world? "But," Jack said, looking at his daughter, "I can't travel the world. I'm a single dad." "I can't leave her," Elena smiled, as if she had expected this exact objection. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not asking you to come to New York. I'm moving my West Coast Operations Center to Santa Monica. I have a facility 10 miles from here. I need someone to run security for the site and manage the fleet. You'd be home for dinner every night at 5:30, she stood up. The pain in her body was evident, but she ignored it. "You don't have to answer right this second," she said. "But the check is yours regardless, please. Don't return it." She walked to the front door. Jack followed, dazed, the check still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. On the porch, the sunlight hit them. Mr. Henderson and the deputy were now standing at the edge of the driveway, looking terrified as the 4 massive bodyguards stared them down. "One last thing," Elena said, putting her sunglasses back on. She pointed to the middle Cadillac Escalade. The driver had left the engine running, the low rumble vibrating in the morning air. "My insurance company totaled the jet," she said, "but they also have a policy about my rescuers. They insist on a signing bonus." She held out a key fob. It was heavy, black and sleek. "It's armored," she said casually, "before plating. Run flat tires, bioweapon defense mode in the AC system. It's safer than a tank, and it has heated seats for Lily." Jack looked at the truck. It was a beast, a beautiful, shining beast. "That's my car?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Technically, it's a company vehicle," Elena winked. "But the company lets you take it home. Consider it a trade-in for your Ford?" She pressed the keys into his hand. "I'll expect you at the office on Monday, Jack. Don't be late." She walked down the stairs. The bodyguards moved with fluid precision, opening the door of the lead car for her. She slid in, vanishing behind the tinted glass. The convoy began to move. The lead car pulled out, followed by Elena's. The third car waited, the driver giving Jack a sharp nod before peeling away. They rolled down the street, passing the stunned landlord. The deputy sheriff actually took a step back as the convoy passed, intimidated by the sheer projection of power. Jack stood on the porch. He looked at the check in his left hand, 100,000. He looked at the key in his right hand. The silence returned to the street, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of peace. Lily pushed open the screen door and stepped out onto the porch. She looked at the massive black SUV sitting in their driveway, gleaming like a spaceship. "Dad?" she whispered. "Is that ours?" Jack looked at Mr. Henderson. The landlord was staring at Jack, his face pale, the eviction clipboard hanging limply at his side. Jack didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just held up the check, let Henderson see the bank logo, and then tucked it into his pocket. He looked down at his daughter. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight on his chest was gone. He could breathe. He ruffled her hair, a genuine ear-to-ear smile finally breaking through the weariness on his face. "Yeah, Bug," Jack said, tossing the heavy fob in the air and catching it. "I think things are going to be a little different from now on." He walked down the steps, bypassed his rusted Ford, and opened the heavy, armored door of the Cadillac. The smell of new leather wafted out, rich and promising. "Go get your shoes," Jack said, his voice strong and clear. "Let's go for a ride."